Hello and welcome back to the PSD to HTML flat design build. In our last video, we built the HTML structure for the header of our document, including the title text at the top and the navigation. And in this video, we're going to code the content slider here. Now, before we get too far, let me go ahead and point out that we're not going to create a functional slider in this course. That's a little bit outside the scope of what we're trying to do here. All I want to do is to get the HTML and CSS working so that our developers can come in and really make this slider work. So we're just trying to get the design elements in place so again our developers can come in and make it more functional. So taking a look at this content slider, we see a couple of items that are going to be constant. First of all, we have the background, which is this plain white background. That's always going to be there. We have our left and right arrow navigation items, which are always going to be there. And then we have these four navigation items at the bottom, which are an indicator of which slide we're currently looking at. So if there's four separate slides, we're going to see four dots here. And the dot with the orange circle is obviously the one or the current slide that's currently being displayed. So first we're going to create a container element for this content slider. And then inside that container element, we'll include the HTML for our navigation units for the left and right arrows, as well as for these four dots down here at the bottom. And then we'll also create a single slide. And that slide will be contained within another container element. And inside that container element, we'll have the text and the image for the slide. So now that we have a basic idea of what we want to do, let's jump into our text editor and make that happen. Now I've moved everything into a new folder, so all the changes that we make in this lesson will be saved in the Site04 folder. And in this folder we can see we've already created the header here. And next I'm going to move on to the feature slider. Now everything else, if we go back to our Photoshop file, everything else from this feature slider all the way down to our footer, all of that is contained within this 1000 pixels of width. So I'm going to put all of this content inside a section element. And that section element will contain all of our main content. And then inside that section element, we'll have a div for our feature slider. And then we'll have another section for our feature services. And then we'll have a footer element for the bottom. But all of that, all three of those sections will be contained within this section element. And we're going to give that a class of main content. So we'll start in our HTML after our header. I'm going to skip a couple lines just to make it a little easier to read. And I'm going to create our section element and give it a class of main-content. And then just so I don't forget, I'm going to go ahead and skip a couple lines and put our closing section tag. So again, everything from our slider to our main content to our footer is going to be contained within this section element. So basically all the rest of our content will be contained inside this section. So just inside that section, we're going to create a div with a class of feature-slider. And this div is going to contain everything for that slider, including the HTML for the very first slide. Now, depending on how your developers want to set it up, you might also include separate divs for all of the slides that are going to be in that feature slider. Or your developers might want to do all of that dynamically. But we at least need to get one slide in place here so that the developers can have something to work off of. So they'll know what structure and what classes they need to use if they decide to do all of this dynamically. So inside this feature slider, the first thing I want to get out of the way are going to be the navigation items. Now, as far as the placement of the navigation items, let's jump back into Photoshop. You'll notice that these are in a definite position. And as far as the placement of these items go, we're going to do that using absolute positioning. So I'm just going to insert these as a couple of links and then an unordered list with some links inside it in our HTML. And then once we get to our CSS, we'll use our CSS to position these items where we want them to be. So let's go back into our HTML with that in mind, and let's make that happen. So we're going to go inside our feature slider div, and we'll start by just creating a couple of empty links for our left and right navigation arrows. So we're going to do that by creating an anchor tag here with an href of pound. And I'm going to give this first one a class of nav-left for the left arrow. And I'm not even going to put an image inside that. I'm going to do that in HTML in CSS as well. So I'm just going to make this an empty anchor tag. So then I'm just going to highlight that, copy it, go to the next line and paste it, and we'll just change nav left to nav right. So we have two different anchor tags here. Both of them are empty anchor tags. And again, in our CSS, we're going to define what these look like and where they're positioned on the page. So we don't have to worry about line breaks. We don't have to worry about anything like that. We'll just put those anchor tags there and then position them later on in CSS. Then I'm going to go to the next line. And now we need to take care of the 4 navigation indicators at the bottom left corner. And I'm going to put those in an unordered list. So I'm going to create an unordered list here. And I'm going to give it a class of slider-nav. Then we'll skip a couple lines and put our closing UL tag. And we'll use that slider nav class in our CSS to, again, position and style this particular unordered list. And here we're just going to have some empty links as well for each of our list items. So we'll create one list item here with an anchor tag, href equals pound. And then we'll create our closing anchor tag and our closing list item tag. So all 4 of those navigation bullets are going to look exactly the same. So we'll just copy that line there, paste it 3 times, and then I want some way to indicate that one of these is the active slide, that one of these links is the link for the active slide. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to give a class to that list item. So again, if we look at our Photoshop page, this very first item here is the active slide. It's the indicator for the active slide, letting us know that we're currently on the very first slide in this slider, and it's a different foreground color. And we're just going to give that first list item here a class of active. That way we can style that particular list item a little differently than the rest of them. So now that we've created all of the navigation for our slider, I'm going to create the content for the first slide. So I'm going to put the first slide inside a div with a class of slide. And then again, you would need to have a conversation with your developers to see how they're going to make this function, because you might need to add another class to this particular slide to let them know that this is the current slide. So you might have another class here called slide active or slide current or something like that. But for the basic design, we don't really need anything there. So I'm just going to leave it at a class of slide there. And then we'll skip a couple lines and put our closing div tag for that class. And I'm going to go ahead and put a comment here also that says slide, so that we know which div this particular closing div tag is closing. And then for the closing div tag after that, that's for this feature slider div up here. So we're going to go ahead and put a comment there as well and type in the name of the class that it's closing here, which is the feature slider class. That way it'll be a little easier to keep track of which closing div tag is closing which opening div tag. So inside our slide, if we go back to our design here, we basically have 2 sections. We have one section with the text, and then another section with an image, a feature image. And so we're going to basically block those off into 2 separate columns. And for our first column, we're just going to wrap that in a div, and we'll give it a class of slide text to indicate that it's going to contain all of the text for this slide. So we'll go back into our code, and then just inside this div with a class of slide here, we're going to create a div with a class of slide-text. So we'll skip a couple lines, put our closing div tag for that, and then again we'll put a comment here that says slide text so that we again know which div we're closing there. And then inside that slide text div, we'll put all of the text for our slide. So I'm going to use an H2 tag for the heading text, and inside that heading text we said web design services, and then our closing H2 tag. And then we'll have a short paragraph talking about Jerry Clutterbuck. And I've already copied the text, so you don't have to watch me write it out. So we'll just paste the text there. And then we'll put our closing paragraph tag there. And then after that paragraph, we're going to put a link. So we're going to use an anchor tag. And we want this link to end up looking like a button. If we go back to our Photoshop file, we can see that this is a rounded rectangle button with a link in the center. And we're going to do this using an anchor tag. And in CSS, we'll make it actually look like a button. And we'll do that by giving this a class of btn for button. So for this anchor tag, again, we'll give it a class of btn. And then we might have several btns on our site. And some of those btns might have a different background color. Well, if you remember, we already used a few classes up here in our main nav to indicate what color we want to give our backgrounds. So we can use those same classes for this particular button if this button is going to be one of those same colors. And it is. It's going to be that same orange color. If we go back to Photoshop here, it's going to be the same orange color as our home button. So we can use the BG orange class there. So let's go back down to our anchor tag here. So we gave it a class of button. I'm going to hit space and give it a second class of BG-orange. And again, all that BG orange class is going to do is it's going to tell that element, or it's going to give that element, I should say, an orange background. So then we'll assign it an href here, and we'll just use pound again for the link. And then inside that anchor tag, we'll put our text. So click here to learn more. And then we'll have our closing anchor tag. So that's all the text we need for this slide. So after this closing slide text div tag, we'll go to the next line. And again, this slide text is going to be the left portion of the slide. And on the right side of the slide, we're going to have the image. So we're just going to create an image tag after that closing div tag. And we're going to give that a class of slide-image. So we'll use the slide image class in our CSS to style this particular image, to position it where we need it. So I'm going to put an alt attribute here. We'll just say web design services, and then we'll point to the image itself, which is the portfolio.jpg image that we saved in our images folder. So our images folder is located at img/, and then the name of the image file, which is portfolio.jpg. And that wraps it up for our feature slider. So again, we have our feature slider, which takes up all of this room. It's all contained within this container div with a class of feature slider. Then we have our navigation elements, which are a couple of links, and then 4 more links inside an unordered list. And then we have all of our information for what one single slide in our slider would look like. So our developers might take this and go in and use this basic structure and use these CSS classes to generate the other slides within this particular slider if they decide to do it dynamically. Or you might have to go in and create more of these slide divs yourself to use inside your slider. But again, that's going to involve a conversation with your developers to see how they want to put this particular slider together. But for now, that's going to work really well for us. So again, we have this div with a class of slide, and that contains all of the information for a single slide within our feature slider. So within that slide, we have one column contained within this slide text div, which has all of the text for our slide, and then another column, which is really just an image. So that image is going to be kind of like the second column in that particular slide. So that wraps it up for our feature slider. Let's go ahead and save our file. And if we wanted to at this point, we could right click on that and open it in Chrome. Now it's not going to look really great just yet because we just have a bunch of text and a couple of images thrown in. We haven't styled anything at all yet, but it's there for you if you want to look at it. So that wraps it up for this particular video. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.